Have you ever considered that endless ice rain could have been a much more formidable enemy to people in the past than armed adversaries? In a world without central heating, synthetic fabrics, and waterproof membranes, prolonged rain was a death sentence, leading to fatal hypothermia. The ability to stay dry in the wild was not a matter of comfort, but the only condition for the survival of entire peoples for millennia. The indigenous peoples of North America, from the dense forests of the east to the endless Great Plains, honed their skills in resisting the elements for centuries. They learned to use the gifts of nature in ways that are difficult for us to imagine today, turning ordinary smoke and fat into a reliable shield against the elements. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple strip of leather could save a warrior's life and why campfire smoke was more important than the fire itself. What if I told you that the most reliable raincoat was completely invisible to the human eye? The first and most important line of defense against endless dampness was human skin itself, covered with a special protective layer. The Plains Indians understood perfectly well that wet clothing could be a deadly trap, drawing heat from the body at an alarming rate. Therefore, in heavy rains, when any clothing would get soaked through, the best solution was to take it off and apply protection directly to the body. A mixture of bear or bison fat mixed with certain herbs created a water-repellent film on the skin. This layer of fat worked on the same principle that we see today in waterfowl. Water simply rolled off the body without lingering on the surface. The layer of fat also acted as a heat insulator, retaining the body's internal heat and preventing the cold wind from cooling the skin. Applying fat was a daily ritual, especially in the fall, when the rains became prolonged and icy. It was important to cover every part of the body, paying special attention to the chest, shoulders, and feet. Even the face was covered with a thin layer of protective substance so that water would not cover the eyes or cool the cheeks. The smell of this coating was distinctive, but in conditions of survival, no one paid attention to it. The fat was obtained during hunting and carefully stored in special bladders or containers made of raw hide. It was valued no less than weapons, because without it, a person became defenseless against the elements. Some tribes added pigments such as red ochre to the fat, which enhanced the protective properties of the mixture. Ochre acted as a mild abrasive and an additional barrier against insects and sunlight when rain gave way to sunshine. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Do you agree with the arguments presented? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new stories about survival. Did you know that it was smoke, and not just the skill of tanning, that turned ordinary hides into a material capable of withstanding water? Ordinary rawhide becomes slippery and heavy when wet, and when dry, it hardens like wood and breaks. To turn deer or bison hides into soft, breathable, water-resistant suede, a complex smoking process was required. It was a lengthy process that transformed organic material into a reliable fabric for clothing. Native American women built special structures, similar to small tents, out of sewn skins, hanging them over smoldering rotten wood. The smoke penetrated deep into the fibers of the skin, enveloping them and changing their structure at a microscopic level. This process prevented the fibers from sticking together when wet, allowing the skin to remain soft even after heavy rain. Smoked leather acquired a characteristic golden brown hue and a specific smell that accompanied a person throughout their life. The longer the leather was kept over the smoke, the darker and more resistant to moisture it became. For particularly durable moccasins or capes, intensive smoking was used, bringing the color to a dark chocolate shade. Certain types of wood that produced thick but not hot smoke were used as fuel for smoking. Rotten stumps or special types of wood, rich in resins, were often used. It was important to ensure that the fire did not flare up. Otherwise, the precious leather could burn or shrink from the heat. This required constant attention and patience. The process could take several days. The result was a material that, when wet, dried quickly and regained its original softness without additional effort. Clothing made from such leather was not completely waterproof, like modern rubber, but it was breathable. This was critically important, as a completely sealed suit would cause a person to sweat, and moisture from the inside would be just as dangerous as rain from the outside. Smoke suede swelled with moisture, becoming denser and preventing water from reaching the body. It worked like a membrane, regulating humidity and temperature. Even when wet, such clothing retained heat better than the textiles brought by Europeans. Ready to find out how one small detail on clothing could wick away liters of water? Guess how long it took to create this element, which many mistakenly consider to be merely a decorative embellishment. The long fringe on the sleeves, shoulders, and seams of Native American clothing is not a fashion statement, but a brilliant engineering solution for water drainage. When rain hits a smooth leather shirt, the water tends to soak into the large surface or run down to the seams and waistband. Fringe, on the other hand, acts as a drainage system, breaking the flow of water into many small streams. Each strip of leather serves as a channel through which water flows downwards under the force of gravity, towards the very ends. At the ends of the fringe, the water collects in droplets and falls down without touching the rest of the garment or the body. This allows the main area of the jacket or leggings to remain relatively dry for much longer. This was especially important at the seams, where the needle pierced the leather, creating vulnerable spots for moisture to penetrate. Sewn along the seam, the fringe diverted water away from these openings, acting as a kind of visor. The longer the fringe, the more effectively it diverted water away from the body. When in motion, the fringe also helped the clothing dry faster by increasing the surface area. Fluttering in the wind, the strips of leather released moisture into the air faster than a solid piece of material. This was critically important during short breaks between rains, when it was necessary to dry off quickly. In addition, the fringe helped break up the hunter's silhouette. But in the context of rain, its hydrodynamic properties were paramount. The Iroquois and Plains peoples used this technique extensively, decorating almost all elements of their outer clothing with fringe. Making fringe required care and precision so as not to damage the main fabric of the garment. Often, the fringe was cut from a separate piece of leather and sewn into the seams. This made it possible to replace damaged elements without having to re-sew the entire shirt. The leather for the fringe had to be soft enough to hang vertically, but strong enough not to break off in the forest. Be sure to like this if you didn't know the true purpose of fringe. What if everything you've been taught about roof construction has ancient roots in the forests of North America? In the wooded regions of the Northeast, where the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, lived, elm bark was the primary material used for shelter from the rain. This material had unique properties. It was flexible when fresh and incredibly strong and water-resistant after drying. The bark was stripped in huge sheets in the spring, when the movement of sap made it easy to separate from the trunk. These sheets were then straightened under a press to produce smooth building panels. The construction of a longhouse or temporary shelter resembled the laying of tiles. The sheets of bark were laid on top of each other with a large overlap so that water could not seep into the joints. The top sheet always overlapped the bottom one, creating a watertight cascade for rainwater drainage. The bark was tied to a wooden frame with bast or spruce roots, which did not rot from moisture. Unlike skins, bark did not absorb water, stretch, or rot for many years. Special attention was paid to the roof ridge, the most vulnerable part of any building. There, the sheets of bark were laid with an overlap or covered with special gutters made of the same bark. This prevented water from getting inside even in strong winds, which could blow drops under the flooring. Inside such a house, it was always dry, even if a hurricane was raging outside. Elm bark had a rough texture with grooves that served as microchannels for water drainage. Hunters used a similar principle for temporary shelters in the forest, but in a simplified form. They quickly built a frame out of branches and covered it with layers of bark found nearby. If there was no elm, they used birch bark, which, thanks to its tar content, did not let water through and did not rot. The birch bark sheets were sewn together with roots, and the seams were coated with resin from coniferous trees. Such a shelter could be built in an hour and provided reliable protection from nighttime rain. Did you know that Native Americans use bark not only for roofs, but also to make canoes? The tipi of the Plains Indians is not just a tent, but a perfect aerodynamic structure, ideally suited for protection from rain and wind. Its conical shape prevents water from accumulating. Drops instantly roll down the steep walls. The tipi's cover was sewn from bison hides that had been treated with smoke to make them water repellent. But the main secret to keeping the inside dry was a system of smoke vents, known as ears, located at the top. These vents were adjusted using long poles from the outside, allowing the smoke hole to be closed so that rain could not get inside, but smoke from the hearth could still escape. The orientation of the teepee always took into account the prevailing winds. The entrance usually faced east, towards the rising sun, and away from the wind-carrying rain. Correct installation of the valves created a draft that drew smoke out even in wet weather. If the rain was vertical, the flaps were brought together, completely blocking the access of water. If the rain was slanting, the flaps were turned away from the wind, creating a protective visor. Controlling these flaps was an art mastered by the women of the tribe who looked after the home. Inside the teepee, there was another level of protection, an inner lining, or dew. This was a strip of leather or fabric about 5 feet high that was tied to poles around the entire perimeter inside the dwelling. It reached the ground, while the outer covering of the teepee usually did not touch the ground for a few centimeters for ventilation. This gap created a draft of air that rose through the smoke hole, carrying the smoke away. But during rain, the lining served another purpose. It caught drops that could seep through the lacing holes or run down the poles. The water ran down the outside of the liner to the ground without entering the living space or sleeping areas. Thanks to this air gap, the inside of the tipi was always dry and warm, even when the walls were wet. Cold, damp air remained between the outer cover and the liner, acting as insulation. The shape of the teepee also allowed it to withstand the storm winds that often accompany rainstorms on the plains. The wind flowed around the cone, pressing it to the ground instead of knocking it over. The poles, resting on the ground, created a rigid frame that could deform slightly under gusts, but did not break. Water flowing off the teepee drained into the ground around the perimeter, and often a small ditch was dug around it to carry away runoff. Life in a teepee during rain was cozy and safe. The hearth in the center provided heat, which was reflected off the walls and circulated inside. People sat on skins, protected by a double layer of walls and proper ventilation. It was a mobile but incredibly reliable shelter, capable of withstanding any weather. The tipi design had been refined over centuries, and there was not a single unnecessary detail. Are you ready for the shocking truth that wet feet killed faster than hunger? In conditions of constant dampness, keeping your feet dry was the #1 task for any traveler or hunter. The Indians used several types of moccasins, but there were special tricks for wet weather. Ordinary suede moccasins got wet instantly, so they were soaked in fat and smoked very thoroughly. But the main secret was the removable filling for the shoes. Dry grass, moss, or bison wool was placed inside the moccasins. This layer created an air cushion, insulating the foot from the cold ground and damp leather. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with fresh grass, which was always available in nature. This worked much more effectively than trying to dry the shoes themselves, which was practically impossible in the rain. The dry layer absorbed sweat and external moisture, leaving the skin of the feet relatively dry. On the plains, moccasins with stiff soles made of rawhide, which absorbed less water than soft suede, were often used. However, rawhide became slippery on wet grass, so the soles were sometimes notched or left with wool. Some tribes had special galoshes made of untreated hide, which were worn over regular moccasins in muddy conditions. The wool on these galoshes was turned outwards or inwards, depending on the purpose, warmth or traction. When crossing wet meadows or streams, Indians often took off their moccasins and walked barefoot, if the temperature allowed. It was easier to wipe and warm the skin of the feet than to dry complicated shoes. Moccasins were hidden under clothing, closer to the body, so that they remained dry until it was time to stop for the night. This required hardening, but it preserved the main resource: dry shoes for the night. In the evening, by the campfire, caring for one's feet became the main activity. Moccasins were never dried too close to the fire, as wet leather could shrink and become hard as stone. They were dried slowly, stuffed with warm ashes or stones wrapped in grass. The softness of the shoes was restored by kneading them with your hands and adding a small amount of fat. Neglecting foot care could lead to trench foot, a condition in which the skin dies from prolonged exposure to moisture and cold. The Indians were well aware of this danger and taught their children from an early age to take care of their shoes. A spare pair of moccasins was always hung on a belt or carried in a dry bag. It was a strategic reserve that was guarded more closely than the eye could see. Do you think you could walk barefoot through a wet forest to save your shoes? Bison hides were not just trophies, but universal mobile homes for the inhabitants of the plains. Winter and autumn hides, obtained when the animal's wool was at its thickest, were turned into the famous buffalo robes. The secret of these robes lay in the thick undercoat and guard hair that nature created to protect the animal from snowstorms and downpours. The structure of bison wool is such that it repels water well and retains warm air inside. During rain, the robe was worn with the fur facing out or in, depending on the intensity of the precipitation and wind. If it was cold rain, the wool was often turned inward to retain body heat, and the outer leather side, well oiled and smoked, was exposed to the elements. The leather side acted as a windbreak and water-repellent screen. If it was necessary to keep warm in dry but frosty weather, the fur could be on the outside, collecting the sun's heat. These capes were huge, and you could wrap yourself up in them, creating your own microclimate. They were often painted with geometric patterns, which were also applied using adhesive paints that further sealed the leather. Such a cape could be quite heavy, especially if it got wet, but its protective properties outweighed this disadvantage. Under such a cape, a person could sleep on damp ground without fear of catching a cold. The skins of other animals, such as beavers and otters, were used to create lighter items of clothing. The fur of waterfowl had exceptional water-repellent properties due to its natural oils. They were used to make hats, collars, and sleeve trimmings to prevent water from seeping under clothing. Even a small strip of beaver fur around the neck could significantly increase comfort by preventing cold drops from getting down the back of the neck. Caring for such capes took time. After rain, they had to be thoroughly dried and kneaded to prevent the leather from stiffening. The women of the tribe spent hours tanning a single skin, using bone scrapers and a mixture of animal brains for tanning. A good bison cape lasted for years and was often passed down as an heirloom or used as a valuable gift. It was clothing that was not afraid of thorns, campfire sparks, or heavy rain. Unlike the wool blankets brought by traders, which became heavy and cold when wet, bison hides kept you warm even when wet. It was a perfect example of using local resources to maximize adaptation to the environment. Building a fire in heavy rain is an art that separated an experienced survivalist from a dead man. The main problem was finding dry fuel when the entire forest was saturated with water. The Indians knew that wood lying on the ground was useless. It had absorbed moisture like a sponge. They looked for dead wood, dead trees that were still standing upright, or the lower dry branches of fir trees, hidden by a thick canopy above. Inside such branches, even if the bark was wet, the dry core remained. To start a fire, the upper wet layer of wood was cut away with a knife or axe to reach the dry center. Thin shavings, known as fire feathers, were cut from this dry part, which would ignite at the slightest spark. Birch bark was used for kindling, which, thanks to its oil content, burns even when wet and produces a high temperature capable of drying small twigs. The resin of coniferous trees also served as an excellent combustion accelerator. The second trick was in the construction of the fire itself. It was never built in a pit where water could accumulate. On the contrary, a small elevation was made of stones or raw logs, creating a platform. A simple canopy was often constructed over the fire from a piece of bark or one's own cloak until the flames gained strength. Once a layer of hot coals had formed, the fire became resistant to raindrops. To preserve the fire during transitions, they used tinder or rotten wood sealed in a horn or clay pot. A smoldering ember could live for hours without access to open air, and it could be fanned into a new fire at a new campsite. This eliminated the need to obtain fire by friction or striking sparks each time, which was extremely difficult and laborious in wet weather. The choice of location for the fire was also important. It was lit under the protection of an overhanging rock, a thick tree, or inside a temporary shelter. The ability to maintain a small, hot fire that did not produce much smoke, but effectively dried clothes was an essential skill. Large fires required a lot of wood and were difficult to protect from rain, so economical hearths were preferred. The fire burned constantly in the teepee, creating an upward flow of warm air that dried not only the people, but also the structure of the dwelling from the inside. The smoke passing through the opening created a kind of plug that prevented rain from penetrating inside. The fire was the heart of the home and the main tool for combating dampness. In forests and subarctic regions, Native Americans used the unique properties of moss, especially sphagnum. This plant has a phenomenal ability to absorb moisture, surpassing even cotton wool in this respect. Moss was collected, dried, and used as a universal hygienic and absorbent material. In conditions of endless rain, dry moss became a lifesaver for the most vulnerable parts of the body and equipment. It was used as diapers for babies, placed in special carrying cradles. Moss instantly absorbed liquid, leaving the child's skin dry and warm, which was critically important in cold weather. Women also used it as a hygienic product. Hunters also found a use for moss. Bundles of dry moss served as excellent towels with which to dry off after walking in the rain. In shoes, moss worked as an insole, absorbing sweat and moisture that seeped in from the outside. Unlike grass, moss also had antiseptic properties, preventing the growth of fungus and bacteria on the feet. Iodine and other substances contained in sphagnum healed minor abrasions and wounds. It was a natural first aid kit and comfort in one bottle. Moss was also used to caulk cracks in temporary shelters. It was used to plug the joints of bark or logs to prevent wind and rain from getting inside. Dry moss is an excellent insulator that retains warm air. A layer of moss between two layers of leather or bark created a thermos effect. Moss harvesting was a seasonal activity. Women gathered large quantities of it on dry days and hung it on tree branches to dry. A supply of dry moss in the home was a sign of a good housekeeper. If the moss got wet, it could be squeezed out and dried by the fire fairly quickly. This simple plant saved thousands of lives from infections and hypothermia. The use of moss shows how deep the knowledge of the properties of the surrounding flora was. Where modern man sees only soft bedding under his feet, the indigenous people saw a valuable resource for survival. Last but not least is psychological adjustment. Native Americans possessed incredible patience and the ability to accept nature as it is. If the rain was too heavy and dangerous to travel, they did not try to fight it, risking their lives. They set up camp, created a safe shelter, and simply waited. The ability to slow down, conserve energy, and wait out the bad weather was an important part of their survival strategy. During such periods of forced inactivity in a tipi or longhouse, life did not stop. People repaired equipment, made arrows, embroidered, or told stories. This strengthened social bonds and maintained morale. Panic and fuss in survival situations burn precious calories and lead to mistakes. Calmness, on the other hand, allowed for informed decisions. They understood the rhythms of nature. Rain was not seen as a curse, but as a necessary part of the cycle of life, providing water for the earth and grass for the bison. This philosophical attitude helped them endure physical discomfort. If you cannot change the weather, you must change your attitude toward it and adapt. Many early travelers noted the stoicism of Native Americans. A warrior could sit under a cloak for hours, completely motionless, while the rain drummed on his shoulders. It was a form of meditation and conservation of bodily resources. Fighting the elements head-on often led to exhaustion, while flexibility and patience gave a chance to survive. This mental fortitude was instilled from childhood. Children were taught not to complain about the cold or dampness, but to look for ways to improve their situation. Survival was a collective effort, and the whining of one person could undermine the spirit of the whole group. Therefore, the ability to maintain a cheerful spirit in a wet and cold forest was valued as highly as the ability to shoot a bow and arrow. We have seen that rain protection for the indigenous peoples of North America was a complex science involving chemistry, physics, architecture, and biology. From the fat on the skin to the aerodynamics of the tipi, from the smoke treatment of suede to the use of moss, every element of this system had been tested by centuries of harsh trials. They did not fight nature, but used its laws to their advantage, turning a hostile environment into their home. This knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, allowed them to thrive in the harshest climates of the continent. Which of these ancient survival methods do you think would be useful to a modern tourist who finds themselves in the forest without high-tech equipment? Write in the comments which method surprised you the most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn even more secrets of the past.